Victoria Ashworth, the HOA President, stood on my driveway with a cold expression, declaring that I had exactly 24 hours to remove my unauthorized structure, or she would involve the county authorities to take possession of the land. I was only 3 days into building my dream cabin when she appeared, with a thick clipboard and a sense of absolute authority, claiming that every piece of lumber I had placed violated the strict community standards of Pine Valley. She waved official-looking documents in the mountain air and threatened me with heavy financial penalties, acting as if she held the deed to my entire life. But what she didn't realize was that I was holding a legal secret that would flip this entire power game upside down and challenge her position forever. My name is Marcus Brennan. I am a 45-year-old electrician who had recently inherited 5 acres of Colorado mountain paradise from my uncle, Silas. After a long and difficult period in the city, this land was my sanctuary. I wanted to build a place where I could find peace and show my teenage daughter, Emma, that we could build a future from the ground up. Uncle Silas had always been a man of mystery, living quietly in these mountains for decades. Most people thought he was just a simple hermit, but when his legal team contacted me after his passing, I began to realize that Silas was far more strategic than anyone ever imagined. The land was stunning, with a creek flowing over ancient stones and the scent of wild pine filling the air. There was an old foundation where Silas had once planned a project, and it was there that I began my work. I had invested my life savings into this cabin, wanting to build a solid home with my own hands. The work was peaceful until day 3, when Victoria Ashworth arrived. She stepped out of a white luxury SUV, her business attire looking completely out of place against the rugged mountain backdrop. She looked at my construction with pure disapproval and informed me that the Pine Valley Homeowners Association held jurisdiction over my property. She claimed my construction lacked the necessary architectural approvals and handed me a formal notice with a bill for $2,500 in immediate penalties. The most confusing part was her claim that my uncle had signed the HOA agreement 6 months ago. I knew for a fact that Uncle Silas had passed away 8 months prior. It was a legal impossibility. Victoria didn't stop there. She attacked my professional reputation and my financial standing, claiming I didn't meet the standard of excellence required for the neighborhood. She was trying to intimidate me into leaving, but I wasn't going anywhere. Victoria returned the next morning with a legal representative who seemed more interested in intimidation than actual law. They served me with papers claiming I now owed $15,000 in retroactive fees, and that my ownership of the property was being contested. I remained calm and headed straight to the county records office. A helpful clerk helped me dig through decades of property filings, and that's where we found a massive discrepancy. The Pine Valley HOA had been officially incorporated only 6 months ago, 2 months after my uncle had already passed away. The boundaries had been drawn specifically to include my land, even though there was no legal signature from the owner. Every member of the HOA board was either a relative of Victoria or an associate of her husband's development company. This wasn't a community organization. It was a private scheme designed to control local land. I hired a sharp property attorney named Sarah Kim, who confirmed that it was legally impossible to bind a deceased owner to an agreement created after their death. But Victoria was playing a high-stakes game. She started a community campaign, using social media to paint me as a dangerous outsider and a threat to the safety of the neighborhood families. My daughter, Emma, was distressed by these false claims online, and that's when I decided to take the fight to a higher level. Victoria's overconfidence eventually became her undoing. To demonstrate the HOA's financial power, she made their budget records public. Sarah and I discovered that the association had collected over $800,000 in special assessments in just 6 months, from only a dozen homes. There were no community improvements to show for it. The funds were being diverted into private accounts. Victoria then attempted to use her influence with county inspectors to halt my construction with fabricated safety violations. However, by involving government officials, she accidentally triggered a professional audit. When legal pressure didn't work, she escalated to direct interference. Someone entered my property under the cover of darkness, damaging my equipment and compromising my materials. They even tampered with my access road to prevent deliveries. Victoria even filed a formal environmental complaint, claiming I was damaging a protected waterway, which was actually just a small seasonal stream. Sarah's investigation eventually uncovered the true motive. A major resort corporation had proposed a $50 million development that required my 5 acres as a central entrance. Victoria stood to gain a massive consultation fee if she could force me to abandon the land so the developers could acquire it at a lower price. She was trying to dismantle my life for a corporate payoff. I responded by installing a state-of-the-art security system. The following night, my cameras recorded an individual later, identified as a close associate of Victoria attempting to compromise my lumberyard. I took the high-definition footage straight to the authorities. But Victoria had one final, desperate move. She made a report to the regional sheriff, claiming I was a domestic security threat and was storing hazardous materials on the site. A law enforcement team arrived at my cabin, and for a few hours, the mountains were filled with sirens and tension. I stayed professional, walked out with my documents in hand, and handed the lead officer a digital drive. The drive contained not only the footage of the nighttime interference, but also the proof that the HOA documents were fraudulent. While the specialists confirmed that my hazardous materials were simply bags of standard concrete mix, Victoria was giving a local news interview, portraying herself as a guardian of the community. The investigative reporter, who had been briefed by Sarah, began asking Victoria about the missing $800,000 in HOA funds. Victoria's composure broke on camera as she struggled to provide a professional explanation. The final resolution occurred at a scheduled community hearing. The room was filled with neighbors who had been told I was a threat to their way of life. Victoria stood at the front, acting as the leader of the community, until I stood up to speak. I revealed the secret I had discovered in a secured lockbox hidden in Silas's workshop. My uncle hadn't just been a hermit. He had been a master of property law. He had formed a holding company decades ago and, during a historic land auction, had acquired the underlying land rights for the entire subdivision. While the neighbors owned their physical houses, the land itself belonged to Silas's company under a long-term lease agreement. As his sole heir, I was now the legal landlord for the entire Pine Valley neighborhood, including Victoria's own residence. I informed the room that Victoria's property was actually in default of its lease due to her failure to follow the original land use terms Silas had set. I held the legal authority to terminate the leases of anyone who had participated in the fraudulent activities against my property. The room went silent. Victoria tried to claim the documents were fakes, but county officials and state investigators were already present to verify the deeds. She was escorted from the building to face charges of wire fraud, document forgery, and making false official statements. I didn't evict the other neighbors. Instead, I announced that, as the new owner, I was dissolving the HOA and reducing the land lease costs for every family by 50%. Victoria was eventually sentenced to a significant term in a professional facility and ordered to pay full restitution to the community. Her associates were also held legally accountable for their roles in the fraud. Emma was finally able to enjoy the cabin, seeing that her father had secured our future through patience in the law. We converted the remaining HOA funds into a legal aid foundation to help other families protect their property rights. Now, the mountains are peaceful. I don't see a landscape of conflict. I see a community that was rebuilt on the foundation of truth. My uncle's land was finally respected, and so was I.